Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at FinSec. This session is titled Implementing Privacy in the Financial Sector, Practices, Services, Responsibilities, and Technologies. We have an incredible panel with us today. We have Mr. Inder Gill, Vice President Litigation at 197 Communications Limited. We have Mr. Sharad Chandra, Vice President Research and Strategy, Earth ID. Mr. Andrew David, Privacy Program Manager at Zoho Corporation, Mr. Marcin, Senior Privacy Counsel at Prosus, and we have the moderator of the panel, of course, Mr. Rahul Rajendraprasad, Data Privacy Officer at HDFC Bank. Whenever the panel is ready, please go ahead. I think we're waiting on Mr. Rajendraprasad, unfortunately. I think there is a technical difficulty. I apologize to the audience. We will begin shortly. Speakers in the meantime, while Mr. Rajendraprasad hops on board, if anybody wants to give opening remarks just on the title, to make sure that, in the interest of time, if anybody has opening remarks or comments, this time can be used for that.
I think there's this moment of silence that all of us are encountering before any start of an event. And it's nice way to start as well because they're all ready to hear. And I'm sure that the audience are also waiting to listen on this important topic of implementing privacy in the financial sector. So that's an amazing topic that we have really good speakers to talk on today. Given that regulations are changing, the landscape of privacy is evolving day by day, and whatnot. All these financial regulations are just being revised on and off. So I think it makes a lot of sense to talk in such an important event such as the DSCI FinSec conclave, where most of the people, most of those attending, want to know what is happening in the background and how to implement it in their organizations. So we're going to discuss some of the challenges that we are facing in organizations, how to implement it in a design perspective and all of that. So I look forward that whenever it's going to be great. Maybe I just pass on to Dr. Saraf to add any of the remarks.
Yeah, I can only second what Andrew said, that especially in India with the upcoming new privacy laws, in fact, not only the financial services companies, but all of the companies in the market will face a small revolution. And we've seen those revolutions happening in other regions in Europe with the GDPR, in South Africa with POPIA, in Brazil recently with LGPD. So I think that India is in that very fortunate position that there are already a lot of already a lot of expertise in the market how to implement privacy into operations of companies, including in the financial sector. So together with great panelists, we'll be happy to tell you more about that.
And I'll just take away from Marcin, basically, and what he's just highlighted is absolutely valid. The fact that India is going to see a whiff of regulation in the coming years also makes it important for all of us to appreciate two facets. A, the fact that the financial sector in India is evolving at great speed, and what was traditionally the business model, there is a lot of disruption thanks to technology and regulation. And at the heart of it, I think the most important bit is actually awareness for the stakeholders, and that I think is very important for all participants in the sector to actually make sure that they put in the right governance and, of course, the information systems. And at the end of it, all of it has to be done by people who are in the organizations. So therefore, it's a very simple thing. Actually, awareness of what is changing in the regulatory landscape, what is changing in, as far as technology is concerned, and what are the major disruptions that are foreseen. I think that is the crux of this discussion. I see Rahul is also joined. Welcome, Rahul.
Yeah, hi everyone. So sorry, I have having some technical glitches. So, I think Inder, you have touched upon very nice topic on this, and I think it is very important to see how the banking has evolved. And right now, we are saying that we are into banking 4.0. So, if you go to different phases of banking, right? So, it starts with banking 1.0, which started somewhere in 12th century when you have branches and you have to come to branch for all of your needs, correct? And it went till somewhere in 1950s or 60s till the first ATM came, and then you move to phase 2.0 of banking, where the banking was supposed to provide you banking after banking hours. Okay. Now there was stage 3.0 where you are having banking at your mobile phone. So mobile banking, your mobile apps, everything. Now we are into banking 3.0 and 3.4, and banking 3.4. The most important part is that it is more of giving more personalized experience to a customer, right? So whether it is his offers or whether any services, and crux of everything is data. Means you need to have a customer personal data to give him, and the technological advancement, the more and more data is getting processed out of it. So that's become very important, and because of that, the most important part right now is how you define a personal data becomes very important, and how to define person. So I would like to hear from Marcin, if you can help us with the definition that how you think, means because the lines are very blurred, means it is all drilled down to your identifiability. So how you say what would be a personal data versus not would be a non-personal data, if you can help us with that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So, indeed, that's a topic where a lot of organizations and a lot of teams within the organizations are asking about. Well, as you said, there is no doubt that such data as name, surname, email address, ID number are personal data. There is a whole set of other data that aren't that directly and naturally felt like personal data. For example, lists of purchased goods or some data inferred from the data that you already have. And in the modern data protection law jurisdictions, that definition is interpreted very broadly. So personal data is, as you said, not only the identified person, but also identifiable person. And that identifiable person can be identified either directly or indirectly, which means that we have a couple of information pieces of information which together may create and may lead to a specific person. Under the GDPR, which assumes this definition, there is an important information and a guide to actually how to understand this, that doesn't need to that identification can also amount to singling out a person, right? So if we have a lot of person and are able to eliminate others and single out a person, that's also identification. So on the India side, if you look at the definition in the draft data protection bill, the data protection bill follows the same logic as the GDPR. So basically, it considers data as everything that we can somehow connect to an individual person and correlate that person. And a lot of it relates to context. There are certain of pieces of data which in certain contexts can be personal data and others where they can't. Also, a lot will depend on the jurisdiction and case law. So we frequently, a couple of years ago, we seen a debate whether an IP address is a piece of personal data. While today there is no doubt about it, right? Although it sometimes it doesn't really provide too much detailed information, but together with other information that you can collect about your browser, about location, and so on, it is capable of singling out this information. So I think that the more technologies appear, the more that definition will also evolve, at least the understanding of the definition. So I can see also the mention about sensitive data, and I think that's also an important thing to raise in this context, that certain categories of data, especially the ones that we care about the most in this forum, so financial related data, have certain more, I would say, stricter rules of using. And this is called frequently either sensitive data. That's the most common definition. So these are the kinds of data which disclosure or alteration or losing will actually cause significant risk to the data principals, to individuals. So you will see that under the Data Protection Bill, financial data is also considered as sensitive data. Which is, for example, a little bit different that under European jurisdiction where it's not, which doesn't mean that it's not treated with due care. Maybe I'll pause at this moment to give also other panelists opportunity to say something, but this is basically the landscape. And just to sum it up, I think it's important to work with privacy specialists on that definition, and that's a huge work that all the privacy specialists needs to do, working together with product engineering and all other business teams to understand what are the consequences of using specific categories of data in their day-to-day operations, and that those data constitute personal data and will need to follow certain rules. I'll hand over
Right.
to.
Right. Agree with your point, Marcin. And I think that's become very important for any organization to understand that what is personal data, because unless and until you do not know what constitutes a personal data, then implementing privacy controls around it would be certainly difficult, right? But there's one more very important thing which I see in the industry right now, and when I talk to my peers also. So the security of data is being in the been a very long time people are thinking about security of data, but still there is a little bit of confusion that when we talk about privacy, is it all about just encrypting your data and putting into secure data stores, or it is something more than that, right? So what actually a thin line between security of data and privacy, right? And for that, I would just need to understand from Andrew if you can throw a little light on what you mean by privacy and what you mean by the security. Andrew,
Andrew, you're on
Andrew,
mute.
Andrew, you're on mute.
Sorry, Rahul. I think it will be a thematic condition, the network fluctuating quite a lot. So so yeah, you were right on that. There is this challenges in understanding of what security and privacy is. Just one example that I always try to quote to help you to understand that is that you go into your house, you go into a space fitted with the CCTV cameras and all these high-fi rigid equipment, security equipments. Like for example, a mall, right? So you go into your office that is like newly made and out of glass, right? So you go inside that, you are all safe. You have a physical security card outside. You know all these fire systems and all these escape systems. Everything is good. You know you are protected and in a secure space. But if a passerby who's walking on the road is able to look inside that building because it is made out of glass and they're able to see what is happening inside. So that is where privacy comes inside. So your curtains, your window blinds, or those kind of things are going to be privacy, just in a very simple layman's perspective. That's the total highlight of how to view security and privacy. So being guarded versus being safe in an environment due to these other controls that you add for protecting things that are more important or more personal to you. So to put it more into our perspective of what we're discussing, so security is more about protecting any and all type of data that is important to an organization or to a person, to any context, any asset or any intellectual property, anything has to be secured, and that is part of security. But personal data is obviously it is. I visualize that as a Venn diagram where we have two sets with A and B and a combination intersection of both. The center point is going to be data protection, security on one side, privacy on one side. There are commonalities, but there are also unique features in both of it. So, for example, in privacy, unique features could be the rights of people, right to access, right to correct, right to delete their information. That is not part of security. Security is more towards protecting anything and everything that is important or that has a value to an organization, such as an asset. So, understanding what it means to protect yourself and to understand how you can protect yourself from the other, the invasions or surveillance of privacy, is understanding that can help a lot of organizations to fine tune their controls, to set it in the right path, whether it's going to be security control or a common data protection control that aids privacy, or it's going to be privacy specific control such as having processes for data access and data governance and all those kind of things.
Yeah, and I think that's very nice thought, and it takes me to the definition of modern privacy, which was given by Dr. Alan Weston of Columbia University, a batting some in 1916 in dissertation, where it has very clearly called out the privacy is all about a claim of an individual to determine how his data should be used, right? So it is more about having a self determination of how you have to use my data. And I see that that definition has been followed by across the various legislation, that it is all about having more transparent to a customer, right? I secure your data, but how can I tell you that how I'm going to use your data is I'm using your data in a responsible way? So that's very important. That the class example was really that how my data should be used. It should be, I should be knowing, and I should be in control of it, right? How I have to do it. And again, it brings me a very peculiar question on, and we are talking about that also. People say data is a new oil, right? But Marcin, do you really think it would be the right definition of it, or do you think data more than that, like something on right of self-determination or something?
Yeah, I think that what the thought that you just cited is very spot on, and indeed, it has in a business context been frequently said as a new oil, and it's super important for development of companies. But at the heart of each and every privacy regulation that we see is actually what you said. So giving the individuals or keeping the individuals with their right to determine and to control of their data, right? And that's I would say, in a nutshell, that has two dimensions. One is the rights that the data subject has towards the data that the companies collect. So this is your right to be informed about what data is processed about you, a right to correct data, a right to request erasure if certain conditions are met. So these are the direct rights that data subject has against their data. But there's also the second dimension um, resulting from the laws, meaning all the obligations and the principles which data controllers or the companies that processing data need to follow to actually do it in a responsible and fair and ethical way. And this includes such principles as informing the data subjects about the purpose for which you're processing data and actually following that purpose. Then making sure that you're not processing too much data, too extensive data for that purpose. Lastly, that you're processing data not longer than it's necessary for the purpose. All of that, these are the, I would say, safeguards and mechanisms that constitute that other side of guarding the data subject's rights and and allowing data subject to have certain comfort that companies on their back end also respect that. And I think that's super important for companies to actually do that and follow all the ethical and responsible rules related to processing data.
Yeah, Marcin, I think very nice thought you brought on that. So one more thing which I have seen is when we are talking about banking 4.0, right? And there is so push on technology. So all the or institution are getting into new ways of doing things, right? So in banking, you have open banking, then you have AIML, then you have cloud and all, and the parameter of the organization are getting blurred we are getting more and more digitized, and a lot of this thing involve a lot of data sharing amongst various entities, like it can be bank and fit between bank or fintech and bank between partners, and that's how we can give more personalized service to a customer. So when we talk about this big technologies of or the emerging tech trends in banking, so I would like to know from Mr. Inder that how you see the privacy or how we can have a proper privacy control out there in such a heavy tech or heavy tech trends. Means how you see that?
Rahul, thank you for the question. You raised a very valid point. As the banking landscape and the financial sector landscape is changing, there's also a lot of upselling and cross-selling that is happening. And of course, as you rightly said, the banks and fintech companies talk to each other, and there are other third-party service providers also involved in many times as their data processors. So this becomes very, very, very important. Again, I come back to the same fundamental point that I made. And also what is also for us important is the fact that because of the sector that we are representing, which is banking and financial services, the data is perceived to be very valuable. So therefore, all the more reason why we should invest in privacy programs, which are, and of course any privacy program or governance program for that matter will only be successful if it is taken to the last mile, if every stakeholder is involved and educated about what are the do's and don'ts. And what is making the situation a little more difficult is the fact that regulation is not as evolved as in various other sectors or various other areas of law. So this is an evolving sector. This is a sector where regulations will come and regulations will then self-correct themselves, or because of investors, the stakeholders' inputs, they will evolve. So it is extremely, extremely important to, in my understanding, make sure that every stakeholder, be it within your organization or a partner or everywhere, is well informed. Awareness, again, I say, is the crux of it. And of course, for any organization, they will have to, of course, go back to the drawing board, evaluate what their governance programs is, how they are linked with the operations of the organization, what information systems they have put in place, and what they need to do to remedy the situation so that they can cater to the evolving regulations. So it's going to be a very dynamic piece. There's no static answer to this, but I think two things: one, you have to relook at your systems, make them as robust as possible, and B, because systems in isolation are of no good, you have to make sure that all your stakeholders, be it your employees, be it your third party partners, are made aware of what is expected from them and what is the trends that are foreseeable. Like now in India, we have the data protection bill, which is been in circulation for a very long time, and we all know in which direction it is going. So this is the time where we need to set up the right systems and make everybody aware. So that is what it is. And I think what is also challenging is the fact that technology is enabling banking and the services that we provide, and there will be innovations that nobody on this panel or maybe even in the wider sector would have foreseen. So this is an area where I feel which requires constant reevaluation, and everybody has to be at it. This is not a scheme where this is not an area where you put in systems once and that's the end of it. This is very dynamic and has to be looked at on 24/7 basis.
Thanks, Inder, and I will come back to you again on the challenges of how we can cope with the data protection bill. But I have a I just want to know from Dr. Saraf on when you talk about open banking, right? So PDS2 guidelines are there in Europe where you can have to give fintechs be your front end, then you will be acting as back end. Lot of APIs are playing in between, right? Then banking sectors are using lot of AIML to give more best services to the customer. So in this big tech trends of banking, how you see privacy is gonna play a role, and do you think privacy concerns are getting lost out there, or do you and how we can ensure that still we cater to the customers, we cater to the new tech trends, and which becomes organization to become more agile and more customer centric to cope up with banking 4.0, but still protecting or preserving privacy at the same moment, Dr. Saraf?
Sure. Thanks, Rahul, for that question. I think Inder has explained most of the things with respect to the controls that are required from a privacy standpoint. But I think a pertinent question which is very relevant from a banking 4.0 perspective is the development of the new technologies, which for customer experience will evolve as we progress. And technology and the products are always going to be evolving, and there will be newer versions of it. So whether from a technology standpoint, whether it's AI, whether that's ML, from a product standpoint, if you're looking at variables, if you're looking at tap and go and pay, or if you're looking at the BNPL, I think all the entire ecosystem, the FinSec ecosystem, along with BFSI as a whole, is an open system at the moment. By open, what I mean is, I think all players have come together, created their own space for sharing those APIs and enabling data sharing to provide great customer experience, allowing the customers to seamlessly transact over using just their mobile phones. So simple things like at FASTag, right? You just zoom past nowadays. Earlier, that was not the case. This is being enabled by the enormous amount of collaboration that is happening within the ecosystem. Now, having said that, I think technology is going to evolve on an ongoing basis, and we cannot stop technology. What needs to be actually relevant in this day and age is the regulation needs to catch up, right? We have seen that in Europe with the GDPR. We have seen that in South Africa with POPI. We have seen that in Australia. We have seen with the financial laws in the US. I think all these laws have been really vocal, have casted penalties on the organizations who do not follow privacy practices, who do not respect customer data, and who collect customer data and make it vulnerable, right? So from an Indian perspective, I think technology is going to evolve, but still, I think privacy is going to be very relevant, and it is going to be at the core of this system going ahead. Now, why I say that is because clearly in India, privacy is a fundamental right recognized by the Supreme Court. So today or tomorrow, there has to be a law which has to protect rights of the customer, because it's a fundamental right. One. Second, there should be control given back to the customer from handling of data. That is what we discussed in our earlier discussions as well, when Marcin was pointing out that there should be a lot of control that the customer should have. He should be able to determine what data can I share with a particular company, and whether that company or that bank can share it through APIs within the network, right? So privacy will always be at the core, and unless and until organizations understand this and embed privacy practices as part of their daily operations, it is going to be really difficult for this particular ecosystem to sustain. Now, how do organizations achieve this particular standard of privacy, right? So if you look at it, I think privacy by design. So this was a term that was coined by the Canadian professor Anne way back in the 1980s. So privacy by design is a concept which is very much applicable and is being adopted by almost all regulations, including the GDPR. The GDPR has extended it further, saying and calling it out as data protection by design and default. Now, what that entails is every organization, every bank, every fintech player in our ecosystem has to think about privacy at the get-go. So right at the ideation stage of a product development cycle, right at the stage of collecting data, whether that be of your employees, whether that be of your customers, whether that be of your merchants, you have to have practices, policies, and processes in place which ensure data protection by design and data protection by default. Because this is the only way you are going to run along with the ecosystem. You will be in line with the technological evolution, and you will be protecting data, giving customers the ability to control what gets shared by the by one organization with the other. So unless privacy by design and privacy as a culture is not adopted by the BFSI sector as a whole, I think it is going to be really difficult for us to sustain. Having said that, along with that, I think we need to have a strong regulatory framework in the form of a data privacy bill. Although I think RBI, IRDA have done a fantastic job in highlighting and bringing about privacy in their own manner through various circulars, through various guidelines. But I think at the moment, it is a zero-sum game, and it is not a positive sum game. What I mean by that is currently the BFSI sector is regulated by these regulators. But if I'm sharing this data with an IT vendor, if I'm sharing this data with a cloud service provider, they are not currently regulated by the same standards and same privacy practices. That entails a zero-sum game, whereas this entire ecosystem, if it has to move to a positive sum game, I think the regulatory framework needs to be in place so that everybody in the ecosystem is on par, manages the privacy practices similarly, and also monetizes the data in a proper manner so that the control of the data is given back to the users, and it's a win-win situation for everybody in the ecosystem. That's how I look at it, Rahul.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Bharat. And the important point you touched upon is privacy by design. And I see various organizations moving towards privacy engineering and assurance framework, where they are trying to ensure that the any system or any solution which is going in production is compliant by privacy, and that's what those frameworks are coming in place. But you have also touched upon a very important thing on having a regulatory framework in place. And then I have a question back to Mr. Inder Gill, that this upcoming data protection law, how you see, and that is one of the questions also from the audiences as well, that how you see that impacting a BFSI sector, what challenges would we have, how we can start preparing it, and the question is that how useful do you think it is going to be for in terms of protecting customers' data? So, Mr. Inder, if you can help us with that.
Yeah. So I will thank you for the question, Rahul. I think what Dr. Bharat said is absolutely valid. The fact is today that BFSI or fintech or FinSec companies are not acting in isolation. They are not acting in a silo. There is the exchange of data with third-party vendors, and at present, unless we have an omnibus all-sector regulation, we will struggle, because in isolation, and I also as I said, and another point which Dr. Bharat made, which is very, very relevant for us to consider, is the fact that in our sector especially, innovation precedes regulation. So to a great extent, what Dr. Bharat said, that privacy by design and default has to be the mantra for us to be winning our customers' trust. Because look, it is one aspect to look at the costs that may be incurred if there is a data breach, but the customer trust that is impacted has a much bigger cost, in my view, as a matter of fact. So, and now coming back to your question, I think the fact that the new data protection bill has provisions which are going to be uniformly implemented across the sectors will help the banking and financial structure. I think most of the organized players in the sector are already self-regulating to a great extent. It's not, at least to my knowledge, it's not been the case that there have been blatant breaches in this sector. But yes, there are steps that we can take. And I think any regulation also brings along with it, and this is no different with the personal data protection bill also, it brings with it deterrence, and deterrence is also something that we need to look at, not only for this sector but the entire ecosystem as a whole. And the personal data protection bill, just like the GDPR, also has provisions for civil and criminal prosecution, and I think those deterrences will also fast track the uniform as in fast track the implementation of the requisite information systems or security protocols that are required for ensuring that privacy remains as a cornerstone or at the heart of customer service. And just to add to what I've already said, what Marcin said also, the right of consumers self-determination is another aspect which cannot be overlooked, whether there is regulation or not, because ultimately we're all in business to serve our customers to the best of our ability. So that those would be my broad thoughts on how
Yeah,
this
no,
is going
I
to pan
think,
out.
I think that that's very important, and I think everyone has to kind of at least start preparing with some basics things in place, right? Having your data flows in place, or having understanding of your personal data landscape, because that's very important when you're talking about preparing for a new regulation, right? Because these things are
Correct.
fundamental across, correct?
And
Now,
just to add, sorry, and just to add, even within organizations, there has to be much more discipline as to what access is to be given to which entity. Just because we are all in like as in all large organizations have divisions and multiple business units, but it is not necessary that the data access has to be omnibus across the organization. So data access is also something that we need to look at, and I think every organization is working towards ensuring that only that much access is given to their people which is required for them to discharge their obligations or responsibilities.
yeah, yeah, I think that's right, and that brings to very important thing on when we talk about technologies, right? So we have various privacy enhancing technologies. Probably like there's a lot of buzzword on homomorphic encryption, or there's a lot of buzzword on differential privacy analysis. So probably it is for both Dr. Saraf and you to please help us that what will be the best use cases in a financial sector of all these buzzwords. Andrew, if you can quickly go first, and then Dr. Saraf, you can post that.
Yeah, I mean, question is very relevant to this context, especially when you're talking about data sharing and you're talking about working together, not in silos. So I totally second that point, and I am sort of this person who's into this AI and ML side as well. So uh, from what I know, right? So data is I do concur that data is the new oil, but maybe it is not, because it is also important for a consumer who possesses that in a consumer's perspective. So organizations' responsibility when it comes to data protection or privacy before it is being processed for maybe for a secondary use or for a similar purpose has to be that anonymization, for example, is a good thing, good way to go ahead. But unfortunately, in reality, that does not work, because anonymization takes away important values that are of utility for a data set. So anonymization is probably not the best way to go. So I was just reading this paper, this research paper from Stanford University, for Stanford Law Review. So that paper was talking about synthetic data sets and how differential privacy could be a great way in cognizance, both together working to preserve the utility, making the best of the data set without having to come up with privacy issues or being regulated by law. So what it said was there is this concept in AI called as GAN, a generative adversarial network. So using that method, you can actually train the machine to take the actual data from our customer, whichever we are going to use for cross sell or upsell, make some business sense of that, and put it into an adversarial network, which it itself deters factors or important fields that could be adversarial in nature, that is, which could expose privacy of customers. So that, along with the differential privacy technique as a secondary aspect, is a good way that law can also be complied with without compromising on the utility of the data set. So homomorphic encryption is one of those methods, but it's again towards the security side. But in terms of privacy, that is still a very evolving area. There's still a lot of research to be done, because in practical sense, having the necessary infrastructure to work to make a search query, for example, on a homomorphic encryption is not an easy thing. Like I work with our cryptography team, and we know the difficulties that is being faced on that. So that is a way that is in progress. But given that data is a necessity for making informed decisions in this banking space to make our customer experience better, I think synthetic or synthesized data set based on patterns evolved from the actual data using these general adversarial networks combined with these differential privacy techniques is something that is actually some there are trade-offs. Yes, I don't say it is 100% super in both sides, but it does make a lot of sense having this factor called degree of identifiability. When you talk in privacy engineering, it brings it to almost as good as 5 to 10%. You can just, given a data set, there is just 5 to 10% chance of us to identify who that person is, but we can still make sure the data is very useful to all of us. So that is a good technique that has recently been researched upon.
No, I know, and most of the things are still in very research phases, but soon it's going to be reality. I think it's not big time. So Dr. Saraf, touching on the same point, I have a question on. Do you think the use cases would be in the banking sector when we talk about all these technologies? What would be the better use cases where you see it can be used more and more, looking at where the maximum processing of data is? So what are the different areas where these technologies can help? If you can help us with those use cases, Dr. Saraf.
I agree to what Andrew also mentioned on the different techniques and the challenges around that, and also to your point that currently they are in the research stage. Even if you look back at what's happening in Europe at the moment with the GDPR coming in play, I think there is a lot of to and fro happening on whether all these new techniques can be relatively applied to different use cases from a privacy standpoint. So if you look at the Indian context, I think wherever there is, API that gets shared, and also where there is consumer data being shared between group entities, for example, to the point that Inder made, right, where he was mentioning about data access. I think a big chunk of what we currently are missing, and also from a regulatory standpoint, it is very evident that all our organizations are moving towards super apps, right? What that entails is you are providing insurance, you are providing mutual funds, you are getting into stockbroking, and you are providing other number of services to the consumers just for experience and to better his usage. So in that scenario, how do you share data between various entities? What are the guardrails that we need to have in place? So I think these are some of the use cases internally within an organization where all these technologies will be applicable. Clearly, when there is a third party that is involved, say, for example, from an API perspective, as I mentioned, or there is any transfer of data where the purpose of the data is not to identify that individual, but it is more of an aggregated data to analyze maybe certain trends within a particular locality or particular region. I think these are the areas where these newer technologies will play a bigger role. But I totally agree to the point that these are yet to be tried and tested. And of course, there would be sandboxes around that, but it is still an evolving process in India for sure at the moment. That is how I look at it, Rahul.
Yeah, that's great. So I have one. I think we are just 2 minutes later, and I have a good question from one of our audiences, Amit. He's asking difference between PII, personal data, and sensitive personal data. So, Marcin, if you can quickly help with that particular thing, because that's again goes back
Yes,
to
of
what
course.
data.
Yeah, of course. That goes a little back to what I said. So basically, where the notion of personal data in general is I would say the most broad definition that we can think and relates to all the data that can be looked at and figure out directly or indirectly. The sensitive personal data is a category of data which which has a bit higher standard of protection because of the possible risk related to compromising such data. So these are, for example, financial data, but also health data and similar categories of data. Personally identified information, that term is understood in different ways. Sometimes it's used in the context of personal data. Sometimes it's used in a more direct way, narrower way, relating to identifying specific, like data which are easily able to identify specific information. So that's how I would frame it. I hope that this helps.
Yeah, I think it certainly helps, and that's the key challenge what everyone sees. So yeah, I think overall, what I would conclude from this conversation with your experts is, with the new banking 4.0 from which we have started our discussion, the privacy is going to be core of it, right? And the organization should be thinking from the customer perspective that how they can give more and more control of their data usage to the customer, and ensure that customer knows that how and when his data is going to be used. And along with the regulations which are coming in pipeline already, there are regulation from the industry specific regulators like RBI or IDBRT or anyone. So we have to be cognizant of what the regulators are thinking, and try to frame up a program in that way and be ready for any regulatory changes, because I'm sure that with the new law coming in place, there would be a lot of shift which would happen, that how we are going to we're looking at the data, especially the privacy, and be ready to answer customer questions, and be ready to kind of ensure that their rights with respect of data is getting honored. So I think that's the gist of overall presentation and overall session. And the privacy enhancing technology is what we have to start thinking of, and the good idea to have a group of financial institution where these things can be researched along with, and and how the use cases would be there. So I think that's a whole gist of conversation, and thanks everyone. I think it was really helpful, and we have tried to answer very basic questions which would come into mind of various audiences who are listening to this discussion. So I think uh, by this we can close the session. So thanks everyone. Any last
Thank
thought
you,
from
Rahul.
anyone? Great. Okay.
I think Rahul, you summarized it well. Thank you, Rahul, and thank you, everyone. It was wonderful and
Thank
nice.
you.
The panel.
Thank you, everyone.